Hi there, it's Mike Cosgrove with PCIA, Professional Concepts Insurance Agency, with our podcast, Pro Concepts, and I've got a good friend and colleague, Craig Thompson, here with me today. You can reach PCIA at www.pciaonline.com, or you can call our phone number, which is 800-969-4041. We do something very weird. We actually answer our phone when people call in, so feel free to call us as well. So I mentioned Craig Thompson with Sullivan Ward, Patton, Gleeson, and Felty are with us here today. Appreciate you being here with me, Craig.
I'm excited. This is neat. I've never done a podcast before.
Yeah, well, welcome. This is new to me as well, and it's been a cool experience. Very cool facility here that we get to be a part of and all that good stuff. But so Craig, you're an attorney there at a law firm. So tell us, why an attorney? Like, why'd you become an attorney?
Good question. You know, I didn't really have anybody in my family, that was as an attorney or anything like that. And I really didn't decide to go that direction until college.
Okay.
And a friend of mine, fraternity brother of mine actually, was pre-law.
Okay.
And was going to go to law school. And it just somehow rang a bell with me. It resonated.
Sure.
And, I had an aptitude, I think, to it. And it was just something that from that point forward, I think it was my sophomore year in college, I decided, let's do this.
Sure. What college? You want to give a shout out?
Yeah, I went to Albion College, Go Britons.
Okay, there you go. And I know we've talked about this before because I went to Olivet. My wife and I both went to Olivet College, so similar platform and all of that. And then you did went to law school where?
I went to University of Detroit.
Nice, awesome.
Yep. So born and raised in here in Michigan. And
okay, awesome.
Yeah,
awesome. So what's one unique fact about Craig outside of being an attorney?
Unique fact, probably, a lot of people don't know. I like sports. I really like sports a lot. And, I played baseball in college. And, I think it's something that, not everybody, you think, you play sports growing up and stuff like that, but we played a pretty good brand of baseball. I pitched.
Nice. In
college. And, so that's something that I even have a friend that played on the team that he's still playing baseball.
Sure, absolutely.
In a 50 and over league. Okay. So we played some pretty good baseball, played against, D1, D2 teams that we even went on a trip every year down to Florida. We stayed at the Boston Red Sox training facilities down there. And so I met like Wade Boggs and Ted Williams and some of these real historic figures in baseball. And it was interesting.
Cool times.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you become an attorney and you specialize in working with design firms. So architectural, engineering, environmental. How did you fall into that world?
Well, it so happens that I worked construction going through school. But I never had an idea or figured that I would end up becoming a construction attorney.
Okay.
It wasn't until after hiring in with Sullivan Ward, where I've been for 27, going on 28 years, that after a year or so of handling some steady diet of lower exposure type cases, that they saw that, hey, look at this guy would be good for construction law.
Sure.
A little more complex disputes that are involved, or the projects are complex, and I took to it pretty well. So that's how I got into construction law, and it always has been pretty much predominantly representing design professionals, architects, engineers, civil engineers, surveyors, geotechs. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we work in the same space, and PCIA, we work with about 500 engineering, architectural, environmental type firms, as well as other disciplines. But so engineer or architect? Which one do you resonate more with?
That's a good question.
There's definitely common similarities, but there's differences.
There are probably, the engineers, I would say I'm fairly technical.
Sure.
Got a pretty good, strong in the math and sciences. But I'm a big fan of the architects.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big fan of all design professionals. I'm a strong advocate for them.
Sure. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I feel the same way. There's great things about both groups, right?
Yeah.
I mean, amazing. So
no question.
So today's podcast is, we've coined it the top 5 mistakes that design firms make from a risk management standpoint. So how to protect design firms. And that's really the whole conversation today. And so Craig's got a number of things that we're going to talk about as a group from a design community standpoint. So what would you say, Craig, is like the first thing that comes to mind if you're at a cocktail party and a engineer architect comes up to you and says, Craig, tell me that number one thing people, firms get sued because of, or they have issues because of?
Well, one of the things that I'd say before we even get going is that, we don't always see the successes.
Sure.
That the design professionals have. So when we talk about, top 5 mistakes or top, whatever, things like that, they have so many successes. And so it's kind of neat to see that. But even on projects where there's problems or there's issues, those projects still, most all times, turn out very well and are successful and stuff like that. But I'd say the top, probably if you get into it, no specific order necessarily, but I would say they have trouble up front or get into issues with their contracts.
Sure.
And, the contract, I would say, would be like setting the table, before you're going to eat. I mean, you set the table before you start your project. So you got to have your contracts in order. And a lot of times the contracts that they get come from, sophisticated owner types or different institutions where they're heavily modified. And, it's a lot, I think, for, an architect or engineer or surveyor or whatever it is to be able to comprehend and digest,
sure,
what all these things mean in a contract. So, I'd say, probably you get a one-sided contract, right? I mean, it's going to come from, say, in most cases, it comes from an owner. And it's going to be heavily modified and one-sided.
Sure. 50-page contract looks like a EJCDC or
AIA,
AIA type document?
EJCDC, DBIA, whatever it is, but it's almost always heavily modified.
Sure, right.
And so, the thing is that you look at it and you try to say, what can we do with this? So, I'd say one of the things is that trying to get that contract balanced and also so that it's coordinated with the other. I mean, the design professionals are not the only players on a project.
Sure.
I mean, you've got constructors, you've got owners reps, you've got construction managers, all sorts of different people involved in a project. So the rights and responsibilities need to be coordinated. And so you need to understand who's involved and so that the contracts work.
Sure.
And they're all coordinated.
So what would you say to the client that says, Craig, we're never going to get these changes made. We're never going to get this. Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah. I hear it a lot. I hear,
sure. We do too.
Well, we don't, and the clients, the design professionals hear that from the owner types or whoever it is out there that, look, we don't make changes to these contracts.
Sure.
Everybody signs them.
I'm a big believer.
Everyone signs them.
Right. I'm a big believer. We don't give up the fight.
Right. We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. And as long as you're being reasonable
sure.
and asking for fair and appropriate changes, and that's all we're doing. You want a fair contract.
Sure.
We're not trying to get it one side in our favor. Right. We're trying to get a fair contract. And so we have a lot of success. I have a lot of success negotiating these contracts, and I don't try to make them Craig's way.
Sure. Right.
You don't have to reinvent the contract or just go away from the owner's contract or whatever. You have to, I think I use the word surgically, but you surgically modify it.
Sure.
And make it appropriate and fair and make the changes that are necessary. And you're going to have a perfect contract? No.
Right. Right.
You're going to have a good contract.
Sure. Right.
Right.
So how about number one thing in a contract that you'd point out? Obviously indemnifications.
Yeah, indemnifications. I mean, the whole thing with indemnifications is, it shifts risk around.
Sure.
And that's the whole concept with indemnifications. So they always want to shift the risk away from themselves. And, at the end of the day, the thing with the indemnifications are, we'll be responsible to the extent that we're at fault.
Right.
Bottom line.
Sure.
But you can write it a whole lot of different ways.
Right.
and even clients of mine, and I've got a lot of great clients, and a lot of them are real sophisticated
Sure.
in dealing with contracts. So they only, contact me when they need me.
Sure.
And a lot of them are very good with indemnities.
Right.
But even, the best architect or engineer or surveyor who's working on these contracts at times runs into a problem. And so I say, indemnities, dispute resolution clauses. A lot of times what I notice are that the architect or engineer will just look at what's there to start with.
Sure.
And, modify what's there. And what we kind of talk about are, okay, what's bad? What's a deal breaker?
Sure.
A lot of times things aren't there that need to be there.
It's what's missing.
And I call those deal makers. So like if there's, a lot of times there's not clauses for, say, for example, workplace safety.
Sure.
Who's going to be responsible for safety?
Sure.
Well, it's not the design professional.
Right.
Okay. But a lot of contracts don't provide anything for that.
So if
or
it's
just
silent. Right. So what would you suggest if it's silent?
Well, if it's silent, you insert a clause that states that the contractor is responsible
Sure.
for site safety
Right.
and means and methods of construction, things like that, or limits on the types of consequential damages, for example, lost profits. These are industry standard type things that get waived in as part of negotiations, that owners are understanding that you're not going to be responsible for this. So there's standard clauses like that need to get added back in if they're taken out.
Right.
And so
we could do a whole podcast on contracts, of course.
yeah, I don't.
So outside of contracts, what would be number two? So contracts is number one. What would you throw?
Well, I'll throw number two. I'll
Sure.
throw it out there and say that there's tools that they can utilize. Mm-hmm. There's resources that they have. We're talking. Both of us here are sitting here, and I'm a construction attorney.
Sure.
Okay, so they can utilize someone like myself.
Sure.
Who is, again, you have tools you have a tool belt. Use the tools you've got available to you.
Sure.
Yourself with PCIA, you're an incredible tool.
Sure.
For the clients.
So you use your insurance agent.
Use your insurance agent.
Right.
I mean, it's not State Farm. I mean, This is professional liability insurance for architects, engineers, and surveyors.
Sure. Right.
This is what you specialize in. So if you have a question on a contract issue, I know that PCI does contract reviews.
Absolutely.
You're very familiar with contract provisions. When there's a claim or a dispute or whatnot, I mean, it's like, how do you handle it? A lot of times it's a good way to go to contact your insurance agent.
Sure.
And then also I'd say the carriers. The professional liability insurance that design professionals have, as you know, is not cheap.
Right.
And it provides pretty robust coverage, and they are usually like the good firms that are out there, the good markets, the good carriers out there will provide support.
Sure.
To the architects and engineers when they have questions about contract clauses or how something's going to be handled.
Absolutely.
So utilize them, tap those resources.
So it's funny, we represent just about every carrier out there that works with the design community. There's always, we call them new kids on the block that come rolling in and want us to offer their products. And, I'm a conservative when it comes to a new carrier diving into the architect engineering world. It always makes me very nervous because I've done this for 25 years where I've witnessed new carriers coming in today. Firms go with them for a wazzle-dazzle price, and then prices start to go up, claims start to happen, and then the carrier decides, we didn't realize what a long tail of exposure we've got for design firms, so we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to play in this sandbox. And I've witnessed firms then have to handle claims with carriers that are no longer offering the insurance, and that is a complete nightmare. And so I have, as a company, we have said, hey, if they haven't been doing this for a minimum of 5 years, as far as working with design firms, we're out. We're not interested in representing them as a company.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of carriers come and go, in my almost 27, 28 years practicing. And,
Sure.
It's the low cost, low budget option is rarely ever the best path. And it's just, you've got to look at what is really behind,
Sure.
it's almost like behind the curtain.
It's almost like it fits exactly in the design world. I mean, the design firms also have that, brand new company that is 40% less than everyone else from a fee standpoint on a project. There's a reason why they're that much less. Like something's missing, something's not there.
Exactly.
So on and so forth. So
when times get tough and when the storm clouds come rolling in, right? And I'm there all the time because I'm the litigator.
Right.
I'm the one handling these disputes, and I've seen it all.
Sure.
Okay. And that's not where you want to be.
Right.
You want to have someone that's got a large footprint in the market, that understands how to deal with large, complex matters.
Sure.
And will have your back.
Right. Right. All right. So outside of carriers, what else would you put in the risk management resource category, if you will?
Well, I kind of already went through that. I mean, obviously, firms like yourself. I mean, the PCIA. You're a great resource. I mean, I've talked about myself. I mean, from a construction attorney standpoint, I've got a lot of clients that also have business attorneys, and they're real good at corporate, legal issues
Sure.
and dealing with things like that. But from a standpoint of when it really gets into issues dealing with construction disputes,
Technical.
and the various issues that we deal with all the time, they're typically not adept at handling those types of things. So it's not a problem for firms to look to their business attorney or somebody else that they might know, but just be cautious because if you're going to look to somebody to assist you when you've got a dispute or a real issue with a contract or something like that, it doesn't hurt to bring in a specialist.
Sure.
I can back up and I can handle commercial disputes, other types of litigation, and I've seen a lot of different matters. I can handle transactional matters, leases, things like that. But really, at the end of the day, if you want to deal with something that involves your fee or your intellectual property or your claims and losses, errors and omissions, things like that, I mean, on projects, you're going to want to have someone that's focused and specialized in that area.
Sure. I would venture to say you're kind of a unicorn in the area in regards to design firms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're the guy.
It's a very specialized area. Not many people practice in that area. There's other construction attorneys. There's construction attorneys that do other types of things, work on real estate, work on zoning,
Sure.
work on different things like that. But when it really comes down to knowing the issues that that architects, engineers, and surveyors deal with all the time, that's me.
Yeah.
So
You're eating and breathing it all day long.
right.
Yeah. All right. So what would be another item that you'd share with the design community?
Well, as far as, let's see, if we're going to do these top mistakes or top common things that AE firms get into, I would say one of the ones I see that are one of the main problems are just, managing owners' expectations.
Sure.
And I say the owner, I'm talking about owner developer types that are out there. There's some of them that are very sophisticated, obviously, if you're dealing with universities and healthcare institutions or entities that, develop stadiums and things like that.
Sure.
They're pretty sophisticated, but they all could use to be informed as to, things like, for example, that the designs, the plans and specifications that architects develop from nothing.
Right.
Okay. They're not going to be perfect.
Sure. No such thing as a perfect set of drawings.
There's no such thing. And so architects, engineers, they're not held to that standard.
Sure.
But yet their clients expect that for some reason. So that's one of the things where, when you're dealing with things like what I would call, the term we use a lot is, errors and omissions.
Sure.
All right, every set of design documents or deliverables they're gonna have errors and omissions in them. Now, a certain measure of that is acceptable.
Right.
And those in the industry know that.
Right.
So when you're dealing with very sophisticated clients, they know that.
Sure.
When you're dealing with clients that perhaps aren't as sophisticated or smaller, you really have to inform them up front.
Sure.
About, it's difficult, I guess, a topic to discuss, but it's not that difficult from a standpoint of saying that, look, you're going to have a contingency.
Sure.
You're going to carry design and construction contingencies to deal with things that come up on a project that are going to add money or time or cost to a project.
Sure.
So typically there's contingencies for things like that. There's, the architect or engineer, they're not stakeholders.
Right.
They're not benefiting from the profits or revenues that are generated from a project.
Sure.
They get paid a fee for delivering a service. And so at the end of the day, you have a great project that is delivered at the end, and it might win awards and everything like that. But there's no residuals or derivatives or royalties that are coming into the architect
Right.
or engineer from a project. So, and we don't have that kind of risk either. We're not the developer.
Sure.
We're not the owner.
Sure.
So there's inherent risk in doing that.
Right.
And taking that position, but we don't have that risk. Our margins are very tight. And so when we're providing a fee on a job, it really is not, it's just not based on performing at a level of perfection, or that anytime there's an issue that it's on our ticket.
Sure. Right.
So I think that's something that needs to be handled at the outset. There's ways to do that. Talk about, that there's going to be change orders.
So boiling it down to communication, understanding your client's level of experience and what level of communication they need to have with them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So changing gears, how about from an education standpoint? What do you see firms can do more in? Any specific topics come to mind?
As far as educating owners,
Their staff,
or
educating
their
their
staff, or staff. I think firms, and there's such a demand for productivity and everything being done yesterday.
Sure.
These days. So that do I know that there is an issue with training or developing or educating the people on the staff? I don't know that there's necessarily, but they have to have mentorships. They have to, have quality control measures in place.
Absolutely.
You can't just rely on software. You can't rely on, AutoCAD or Revit or these different software programs that have the ability to sort through coordination issues and design documents.
Sure.
And expect that just that alone will produce a fully coordinated set of documents that can go out for bid.
Right.
So it comes down to communication, working together. There's a lot of collaboration between those individuals that work at design firms. Mm-hmm. And also, rarely is one design firm involved in a project.
Sure.
They have sub-consultants, whether they be structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil engineering, whatever it be. So They all work together and they really do a good job collaborating. But that is one of the areas that I would think that, if they focused and kept focusing on that area of the communications, and nowadays with COVID and, that being kind of passes to some extent, but with the, the Zoom calls and the different things like that. So some of the communications are not as hands-on.
Sure.
As you will, in the past. I think that's an area where they're still able to do it. I mean, they're still able to pull it off, but that's one area where you can always do better.
Sure.
Is in coordinating with the people within your staff, the people within the firm, and also with the other consultants on the project.
Right. I mean, we have more tools in today's space than we've ever had. I mean, I always think that a face-to-face is always the best type of a meeting. You know, there's different ways of communicating, right? You've got body language and you can hear the pauses and you can see their bodies telling you they're not agreeing with that decision, or that you need to go a little deeper on, you know, whatever the topic is that you're trying to understand from the client. And, you know, and then the next best thing would be Zoom calls. You know, Zoom calls, you still get a good element of that, but not as much. And then third would be verbal conversation or audio, you know, over the phone type conversations. But I think email, I've always said email is a great documentation tool, but it's really a terrible communication tool because it's very one-sided. It can take a whole lot more time than is intended with all the back and forth. And so we're big believers in use a different form and a different form of communication, and then follow up with the email so you've got the documentation piece.
I would agree.
Anything from a documentation standpoint that you'd want to share with the audience?
Well, I think documentation is an important, you know, area in any profession, whether it be a lawyer,
sure,
or whether it be a doctor, or whether it be an accountant or anything. But it's especially important when it comes to design professionals. And so if you have a meeting, if you change or approve something in a meeting that's discussed, you got to have meeting minutes that document that. If there's certain protocols on a construction project where you have your construction documents that go out,
sure,
that get bid on and get built. A lot of times there's things that happen during the course of the project where there's RFIs, or there's things that are where the contractor's asking questions about your design. And so you're responding to those things either in meetings or in response to an RFI, but you need to have it documented.
Sure.
And the way that you would document that is, whether it be in an email or otherwise, but make sure that it's documented. And we could talk, we could do another podcast about how to document things, and
just on that topic,
on that topic alone. But if something isn't responded to, if you get an email, if there's something from the contractor or from the owner where it's a time sensitive or that's bringing up an issue with the design, you're going to want to respond to it.
Sure.
You're not going to leave it open or let it go on without responding to it, because anytime there's a change, there's a cost.
Sure.
Typically.
Right.
Okay. And contractors will try to find a way to get additional sums into their contract. And it oftentimes is at the expense of the architect or engineer.
Sure. So you touched on change orders for a minute. Change happens. Client says, we got to get on this. We got to make it happen via email, verbally, whatever the case might be. What's the best thing a design firm could do to help protect themselves?
You document it. I mean, after, you formally issue either a bulletin,
sure,
or a response to the RFI. If it just takes a response to the RFI, fine, you issue a response. If it changes the design, you consider issuing a bulletin. But there's got to be direction. And I think that, within the design firm, I think it's not necessarily just left at the project architect or project engineer level.
Sure.
That when there's something that is of, I would say, significance or that you're concerned over, I'd elevate it. Get it up to the project manager.
Sure.
Get it up to the project executive.
Right.
Whoever's involved. Take a look at it. And even if you go beyond that, pick up the phone, call the attorney, or call the agent if there's a question, perhaps.
Sure.
It's just, I get calls like that all the time.
Yeah.
So there's ways to document things, document them properly, but nothing goes undocumented.
Right. So I love that you brought up about calling the insurance agent. One of our favorite things to do is to be proactive, where our clients call us and say, hey, I just want to bend your ear on this for a minute. What would you do in this situation? Like, I love those kind of conversations. Those to me are the favorite, where you feel like you're really giving value to them as a company and helping to steer them the right direction on things.
I agree. I get that often, and I always welcome it. And, even dealing on the front end, helping them out with contracts or,
Sure.
Different scenarios that they're involved in, not just dealing with it once it's in litigation or a claim.
Sure. Right.
I mean, that's, I'm adept at handling matters at that stage, but it's also, it's something where you can put someone with a certain skill set on the front end.
Sure.
And it makes all the difference. Maybe you don't need to be talking to someone on the back end.
Right. Exactly. Proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, Craig, what's the way to get a hold of Craig Thompson?
Yeah. On the bat phone? Yeah. I mean, email.
Share with the audience your
my
email
address is cthompson@sullivanwardlaw.com. I don't know if I want to get my phone. My direct dial at the office, 248-746-2776.
Awesome. And by the way, Thompson has a P in it.
It does.
Yeah. Just in case anyone was wondering. And by the way, all of Craig's contact details will be in the show link, so you'll be able to pull the information there and see their website address and all that good stuff as well. So, Craig, I appreciate you being with us today. This was a great podcast with you. If anyone wants to get a hold of PCIA, our email is pciaonline.com. Direct phone number is 800-969-4041. And again, we answer our phones as well, which is awesome. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.